Hi, and welcome to Say Grace, Food for Thought and Hospitality. I'm Steve Palmer, and I invite you to join me as we explore the stories behind leaders in the hospitality industry and beyond. Say Grace is a place to reflect, connect, and savor thoughtful narratives. Everyone has a seat at our table. So pull up a chair and let's discover the transformative power of hospitality together. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Say Grace. Today we are in Philadelphia at the Chefs Conference, and we're so happy to be here, and even more happy to be joined by Stephanie Wu, editor of Eater and a big deal in the media world.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm going to read your bio now. Stephanie is the editor-in-chief of Vox Media. In this role, which she has held since 2022, she oversees Eater's editorial organization and is a key partner in supporting the growth of the award-winning brand, which is celebrating the 20th anniversary. I can't believe Eater's 20 years old.
Nor can I, honestly.
That's crazy. She leads a team of writers, editors, video creators, and audience team members across more than 20 cities and is responsible for the publication's reporting, storytelling, service journalism across all formats. In 2024, she added Punch, covering drinks and drinking culture, and Thrillist, covering travel under her remit. You're busy. You're very busy. She was named Adweek's Editor of the Year in 2024, and the Eater Network has won 12 James Beard Awards, 3 National Magazine Awards, and 5 New York Emmys to date. She is also the co-founder and editor-at-large of Mochi Magazine, the longest-running online publication for young Asian American women. That's very cool.
Yes.
She grew up in Taipei, lives in New York with her family. Stephanie, welcome to Say Grace.
Thank you for having me, and you just made me sound very impressive.
I like it. I really like people's bios because they're, very formal and this.
Yes, and then you meet the person behind all the fancy accolades and words.
Right. When my bio gets read, it's like, I don't know about you, but I don't like pictures of myself. My wife is always like, take a picture. Bios are the same for me. So let's dig in. Tell me about Taipei.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Taipei.
Yes, I grew up there. My family moved back when I was 3, and I think growing up, you don't really realize how good home is until you leave. And so Taipei is an amazing food city. It's got incredible night markets. It's the home of Din Tai Fung, a national an international soup dumpling chain, and the food is just amazing, But that's not something you realize until you leave. You move somewhere else, and then you start to understand the perception from the rest of the world. And I think that was really interesting to me, moving to New York City, where you can find pretty much every type of food, including Taiwanese food, but not realizing, okay, when you grow up somewhere, there's something really special about it, and it's not just because you grew up there that it's special. Like there's something internationally impressive and interesting, and it's, become a big travel destination. And so, like I think many people, I didn't appreciate what I had until I left, and now I still make an effort to go back every year. I still have family there, and it's so important to me, for instance, that my kids know Taipei and can see the area where I grew up and understand the family members that are still there, and hopefully someday enjoy the food as much as I do. So I think a lot about kind of growing up abroad, moving back to the States, and how to continue that connection of, having a home in multiple places, but still feeling like both places are home.
And when you were in Taipei, what was your perception? It sounds like what I'm hearing you say is it's sort of in retrospect.
Yes.
Which is so often true in life that we appreciate things much later. What was your perception of America as a child in Taipei, and why were you, I want to go to college, I want to go to NYU, and,
So I went to an American school, so American culture, I still was kind of living American culture, but abroad, and so all my classes were in English, and we learned U.S. history, and so it was kind of growing up in this like bilingual, bicultural world where every day at school I would be surrounded by kind of like American school curriculum and things like that, and extracurriculars as well. And then at home, I would speak to my parents in both languages, but learning Mandarin with a tutor, and my brother and I kind of like absorbing both culture from a US and Taiwan point of view, kind of mixing that together. But I would say my perception growing up is that the US, as it tends to do in international locations, it exports much of its culture via food, first and foremost.
Yes.
So, you get the Dominoes. And you're like, is this American culture?
Right.
Kind of yes, but also kind of no.
Sure, fair, yeah. I've never thought, I was just in Paris seeing a McDonald's, and I've never thought about it from that perspective.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So you get the Dominoes, you get the McDonald's, you get the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and not that that's kind of all there is to know about US, but I think it is an entry point for so many people. And then for me, the other big entry point was magazines. And so I would love going to the English language bookstores and picking up whether it was, the issue of 17 or Rolling Stone or, fashion magazines and beauty magazines and food magazines, and using that as my first introduction to this like world before, we were online all the time, right?
Yeah.
This is how you were getting your information. You had a group of editors in a room, probably in New York, thinking about the stories they wanted to tell the rest of the world every single month when it came to whatever topic it was. And so that for me was so interesting that I could pick up a monthly magazine. I could see what conversations were being had on the other side of the world. I could interact with it. I could, back then, again, it was write a letter to the editor.
Right.
Send an email to the editor if you were lucky.
Yeah.
And so I love that glimpse into American pop culture. And so as I was kind of coming up in school and thinking about college, that was one of my touch points of, I think it would be so interesting to go into this world of journalism, to tell these stories, not just for American communities, but to figure out like that message then goes abroad. Again, it's globalized. This is before everything became so accessible with the internet.
Right.
But I just love that idea of kind of like curating the stories and telling them for a really large captive audience. And so that's kind of what set me up on this path to study journalism and go into publishing and connect with audiences around the world. Mochi, which you mentioned in my bio, is something I started in college with a friend, and it had a similar point of view. We felt like Asian Americans were a massive population, but there wasn't a publication targeted specifically to talking to this group. And so we essentially said, we want to start the teen people that we wish we had growing up. And we had lofty dreams of putting it in print. And then this is like 2008, quickly realized we were just going to reach a much bigger audience by making it available online, not having to figure out how to physically print paper or distribute to the entire country and beyond. And so that was really my first foray into like, hey, if you can just build something on your own and see who the audience is, see what they respond to, engage with them, have a back and forth on social media or whatever medium, and really, grow the community and the brand from there and let it be something that can speak to people because they feel like they're part of that community.
That's awesome. So you're in college.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back to that because I have questions as a white person that owns Japanese restaurants, and I don't want to make this about me, but I knew nothing in 2010 about interacting with Asian culture. 15 years later, I'm still very much a student, but my world has changed, honestly, through a lot of conversations about tell me what it's like to, and I've learned a lot about the mistrust of the fact that I'm a white person owning Asian restaurant. And I had no idea, like I opened a sushi restaurant because I like sushi, like it was not anymore. But anyway, well, I want to come back to that. You're in college. What was your first gig, and why food, or did you go somewhere else? Did you go to fashion and then came to food?
It wasn't food first. It was, I really wanted to work in a magazine, and I said, any magazine that will take me, I'd love to work there and just learn how it literally gets made, right? I think before you get into the professional world, there's so much you see about the end product that you appreciate, but there's a lot that's hidden about what goes into making that, and I think that's true of restaurants and beauty products and just about anything. Like we focus so much on the product, and we don't, unless you understand the process, you just like can't really figure out if this is the right job for you. So I worked at many magazines, mostly fashion, kind of just trying to learn a little bit about the art department and design, trying to learn a little bit about the business side, trying to learn about the features and the writing and kind of bring those all together to make sure, like, do I just like the writing or do I actually like the business of putting together a magazine? And I decided I really liked the business of putting together a magazine. And that
Interesting.
it wasn't just the writing that was invigorating to me. Because I think a lot of people go into the world because they just have so much to say and they just want to write. And that's so important. And we need so many of those. But I think there's a difference with kind of like being writing first and art and craft first versus the person like me who is, like appreciates and respects the craft, but also very much wants to make sure that there is some kind of underpinning of, whether it's the business model or thinking about the audience or putting together the words with the pictures, with the design and like the zoomed out picture that is something I love about magazines and publications in general, is that it just takes really big teams to bring it
Right.
together. So I, worked my way in many places. And as I kind of got into my career, really actually started as a travel journalist. And that, again, growing up abroad, had never thought about how that might impact the way I approach journalism and storytelling. But of course, once I was in the job, understood that being, having deep roots in Asia and having traveled a lot there and also understanding the US point of view and what drives Americans to travel to Asia. And again, this is like almost 20 years ago, gave me an interesting perspective on being a travel journalist and understanding parts of the world that were beyond your Paris and your
Right.
Milan and London, and kind of like introducing more parts of the world and explaining why people should go beyond their comfort zone, essentially. So I spent a lot of time in the travel world. Travel and food are so interconnected.
Absolutely.
And you really can't think, or I cannot think of one without the other. And so that travel background is then what kind of like led me to lean into food, because it was such an aspect that I loved. And even now I still think of myself as a food journalist, but also a lot of what we cover, or a lot of the way I think about things, is from a traveler's point of view. And I feel like that sometimes has gotten a bad rap in the past, in that everyone is always like, I want to eat like a local. Like, I don't want to go to where all the
Right.
travelers are going. I
Right.
want to go to where all the locals are going. And my point of view is, well, actually, no, because you don't want to go to where I eat in
Right.
New York. It's
Right.
like
Right.
the grab and go
Right.
like
Right.
restaurant around
Right.
the corner.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
want to go to the places where if you're traveling to New York and I want to impress you, I've got a long list of places that I think showcase New York City, in that, yes, of course, New Yorkers eat there, but also they teach you or show you something that you just can't get anywhere else.
Absolutely.
And so that's where I think my traveler's point of view comes in, is that like you have to have not only the insider perspective, but you also need to have the context of like, why is this interesting? What does this say to someone who's never had a type of cuisine, or eaten in a type of way, whether it's sitting on the floor or eating with your hands, and
Right.
and what is the context that kind of makes that meal so special beyond the actual food you're putting in your
I love that. Food people, we're so passionate about eating, right?
We are, and
We're
there's a lot.
we're so excited
It's
about
very
it.
meaningful.
It
Yes.
is. It is. Was there a light bulb moment for you when you realized, okay, it's food? Was it a meal? Were you traveling somewhere? Was there? I have moments where I can tell you, I dreamed up of opening this restaurant, standing on this corner, and this, like, I don't. My brain is very photogenic.
Yeah. I think that it was probably, so I was living in New York, college student, was not going to fancy restaurants by any stretch of the
Right,
imagination.
right.
But when my dad would visit New York on his business trips, he would always say, pick somewhere great. Like, let's, obviously, like, I'll take you out for a great meal while I'm in
right.
town. And so that would be my chance to like do some research, read Eater, read, Bon Appetit, and look at the Michelin Guide or whatever it is, and really figure out, okay, he's here on a weeknight and I don't want it to be too fancy, but I want, I'm craving Asian food, but I know it can't just be the Asian food he eats all the time. And so really thinking through specific situations and how the restaurant you pick says a lot about how much you put into a relationship when you're dining together. And I'm always and now in this line of work, I'm always the person picking the restaurant.
Of course.
But I think that maybe that's my love language is I will find the best restaurant for the situation, whether I'm eating with someone or whether someone's looking for my recommendation and they're going out on their own, and kind of like that matchmaking, and also like, again, knowing the context and knowing the person all coming together is just so special. And I think that was one of the reasons why I really knew, okay, not only do I love writing and talking about food, but I love the service journalism aspect of it. So it's not just kind of like the loftier, food culture, food history, culinary, background and context, but it's the act of like, hey, let me tell you where to eat. And that's really, it's just a very different type of journalism that's no less important.
It's almost like you worked in hospitality or something. It's funny, my two partners who are my investors, who are not at all in the business, are always surprised at the amount of reservations they're making for other people. They're like, I'm a concierge. I'm like, well, welcome to owning restaurants, but there is a joy.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sure you by a multiple of 10, but anytime somebody in my world travels, I am the guy. Where should we eat? We're going here, we're going there. But there is a lot of joy in that.
Yeah, and I've never owned a restaurant. I actually haven't worked in
You
the
look
restaurant
much
industry.
smarter than we do, Stephanie.
But I do imagine that when it's your own restaurant, like it's kind of like you're opening up an extension of your home, essentially. It's,
It is.
welcome in. This is my dinner party that the public gets to enjoy.
Right.
And there's something so joyful about that. And I bring that to my work in the journalism world, even though it's not, as physically tangible, right? I want when anybody interacts with Eater in any way, shape, or form, whether you're reading an article or you're seeing a social media post or you're watching a video or you're listening to a podcast, to kind of feel like they're in that food and dining culture world. Whether you're a really avid diner, whether you're a hospitality worker, whether you're an aspiring chef or aspiring cookbook writer, I think the goal of all things Eater is to show people how amazing the hospitality industry can be, maybe to work in it, but mostly to as a business that you can and should be supporting and patronizing. And we sometimes like to boil down our mission and make it as basic as, we want you to find amazing places to eat, but we also want you to know the stories that go into it,
Right.
what it takes to build a business, what it takes to put together a menu, what chef we've kind of been covering since they were in, just out of school and starting their first restaurant, and all the way into, running an empire. We really see the brand as stewards of like, we're obsessed with every aspect of food, dining out, and the hospitality industry. And if people can interact with Eater in some way and feel that, then I feel like that's where the connection starts, and you start to build that awareness and interest of this food community at large.
I love to hear you say that, because I am, and I think, especially, I think post-COVID, it felt like, it still feels like sometimes that certain journalists, I don't want to be like making blanket statements. I see a lot of negativity in food media. And Katie Button and I talk about this a lot, because we are always like, well, God, there's so many positive stories. And not that like, the Me Too movement, so much in the last 10 years have shown a light on some things that needed to be shown on, right?
Yeah.
And we know that. But I'm so grateful to hear you say that, because somebody asked me, why did you start this podcast? I have no agenda. I'm not looking for sponsors. I just want to tell positive stories about the industry. Like, that's literally it. So it's good. It's gratifying to hear that that's the mission, because, our mission at the Indigo Road is we want to leave the industry better than we found it. We all know we need more people to want to work in the industry.
Yes.
Because people are going out to dinner more than they ever have.
Yes.
So like, whenever somebody raises their hand and says, I want to be a positive force in this industry, I'm like, yay. Because you meet the people doing the work. For the most part, there have been some bad characters, but for the most part, they're these really generous souls who are kind, who, you were talking about the intersection of art and commerce, the business of journalism versus writing. In my world, it's the creation of art and the selling of art, and that can be complicated.
Yes.
You see a lot of people that are creating beautiful art, but financial sustainability, especially right now, feels like it's becoming more and more important.
Yeah, and I think to your point on this kind of post-pandemic shift, I really do think that not only as a journalist but also as an avid diner myself, there was really a feeling during kind of the height of the lockdown that were restaurants going to make it? Like we just didn't know, and I wasn't working at Eater then, but I followed the Eater coverage really closely in terms of all the local editors really just trying to tell the stories of what restaurant owners were doing to be really creative or do something new and show up for their longtime customers. And like you have some things that you look back on, you're like, gosh, like let's never go back to that again. But you also have a lot of, I think, positives that did come out of it in simply just this like huge, I think, wave of transparency that the restaurant industry, really showed off because they needed to. They had to explain to people why their favorite restaurant might not make it through 3 months of everybody just staying in and ordering takeout. And I think that transparency was really I think just drove a lot of empathy for the hospitality industry as a whole. And I don't, want to pretend that like Eater is all sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, or that the food industry is the same way, because it's not. Like there's real challenges and there's hard stories you have to tell. And I think it is all in the name of let's build a stronger industry.
Yes.
But I think that's kind of the important role that as journalists we think through, in that, we don't just want to tell you where to eat. We want to tell you a lot of the why, and that can be such a big part of driving just like everyday decisions of what I'm shopping for, where I'm going, where I'm traveling. And I think it's a big, complicated ecosystem, but everybody kind of does have that role to play.
Yeah. And it is a complex ecosystem, and it's there's just I always ask owners, how is owning a restaurant different than when you were just an employee, right? Because I'll never forget one of my best friends. I called him a tweezer chef for many years. He was in Scott Crawford. Love you, Scott. He's my best friend, but he was a tweezer chef. And then he opened a restaurant. He called me one night and he said, I'm freaking out. I said, what's up? He said, it's 80 degrees in my dining room and it's 7:00. And I'm like, have you called the AC guy? And he's like, yeah. What's the quote? 20,000. How much do you have in your bank? I have $21,500. I'm like, well, it's Friday, so the good news is you'll get sales from this weekend.
Yeah.
You should be able to cover payroll. You got to fix the AC. And he was like, I just don't feel like I can talk to people that don't know what this is like, because they don't tell you about this.
Yes. It's such a literal, like, money in, money out. How much can you cover?
Right.
Nobody's got a ton of overhead. And this is exactly the type of story that I think people, anyone in the business world maybe like instinctually had in the back of their mind when thinking about restaurants and margins. But until, you have chefs on social media really kind of explaining it in their words, you can see a face attached to the story. Like it really led to, I think, just like a more respectful relationship all around.
Yeah. And that feels nice. So you started at Eater.
Yes.
I'm like, I've got to ask questions. we could just sit here and chat about the state of the industry and like, tell me about what was your perception of Eater outside?
Yeah.
And then how did it change when you came inside?
Sure. So like I said, I've worked at a lot of travel publications. And so often those travel publications have offices based in New York, and you've got editors based in New York, and you work with just a ton of freelancers who are based in their local city and can, give you intel on new hotels and new restaurants and what to do and all of that. And so it can and is still, I think, because of that model, everything gets filtered through, okay, what is that kind of like likely New York based person think is interesting and cool, and what stories do you want to tell? Like a model that, has pros and cons, of course. Like
Right, sure.
it can be myopic. We'll put it that way. And so when I joined Eater, what was the most surprising to me, which I didn't know from being a reader of the many, many city sites, is that there are editors based in every city, and they can really tell you, like, hey, I'm going to this, I'm going out and I'm eating 3, 4, 5 times a week. Like, here's what's interesting. Here's what other chefs are seeing that they find interesting. These are the stories that we're really telling on the ground. And then you have a national team that's kind of pulling all of these things together to be able to try and pull from local stories into national trends. And so that, I think, is something Eater has that nobody else has. Both that on the ground local journalism and smarts, and that like 10,000 foot, okay, what does that all mean when you put it together and think about, are there real shifts happening in whether it's ingredients or whether it's business models, or
Right.
we talk about how, like, for instance, there was a moment when like the no tipping model was kind of like like
Oh,
picking up
yeah.
in pockets, and like I just don't think that most other publications can have that kind of oversight of all of this and say, hey, like, this is really a story, this is something we should be talking about because we're seeing it bubble up in not just New York, but in New York and in Houston and in San Diego and so on
Right.
and so forth, and do that kind of bigger look. And so that's something that I think Eater has that's just so special. And so we have this big, like, written engine and the website that, publishes so many stories a day. We've got this video aspect that is much more kind of focused on entertainment because it's, video,
Right.
but it is also going behind the scenes. And again, like, seeing the chefs talk about whether it's their tweezer work or whether it's literally like, hey, we're, 3 days from opening and this massive piece that was supposed to arrive from some foreign country is not here yet.
Right,
And
yes.
like really kind of seeing the ups and downs of running a restaurant. And it's not just kind of like everything is great and everyone's been trained to do everything perfectly. It is also like, here are the realities and here's how we deal with it. And so it's entertainment in that form of getting a peek behind the scenes of what it takes to pull off something incredible. And so I think, again, the Eater ecosystem, while I've been there, has expanded to books, and we have a line of cookware, and we've done so much, I think, to really make sure that Eater as a brand feels sustainable, and that 20 years in, we want to do this for 20 more years, if
Right.
not beyond. And I did so much learning and listening because we have so many team members at Eater who've just been there for such a long time and know the Eater history so well. And so for me, it was really many years of learning, which I'm still doing, and then a lot of deep thinking about, okay, what does the Eater brand mean to people, and how do we hang on to that, and how do we really make sure that that's the core of everything we do moving forward, even as the digital media world is shifting immensely and attentions are, you're on your phone and you're watching a 10-second video,
Right.
you're listening to a podcast, right? Like,
Right.
audiences are everywhere. They're not just typing a URL into their browser and then like scrolling for 30 minutes. And so really thinking about what those shifts to digital media means and how Eater can continue to be like where people are paying attention and where people are spending their time.
That you led me. That's such a perfect lead into my next question. 20 years ago, I've been in the industry 35 years. I'm so old.
Age is a frame of mind.
I know, but when I know it, I do coffee and culture. So I travel around to our restaurants. I talk about our values, and I'll talk about when I was a waiter before the internet, and then I get the blank stares, and I'm like, because it seemed like 5 minutes ago
Yes.
that we didn't have an internet, but it's not been that long. I mean, it's been much longer. So when I came up, you had food critics, right? And you got the review,
Mm-hmm.
and the review meant everything, right? You would be busy or not. You lived and died by, and you had Ruth Reichel was, of course, doing Gourmet Magazine, and it was beautiful.
Yes.
And I think about food media, and probably that was the inspirational period for you when you
Yeah.
were growing up. And now the food media landscape has changed so dramatically.
Yes.
Where do you think, in our world, we talk about reviews. Do they still have the power they did? And so on and so forth. And I think secretly we all still want
Yes.
those good things. How do you think the role of food media has changed in 20 years? That's a
Yeah.
big question
Yeah.
because,
No, I love this.
you know,
I mean, first of all, how hasn't it changed,
right,
right? Like,
right.
I think as consumers of media, as anyone who like watches the news, reads the news, etc., I don't even know how often we think about how like our own behavior shifting is a sign of how the entire world is shifting. That it's not like, it feels so individual and personalized how I read news and get entertainment, but it's not, because our phones and our algorithms and our platforms are kind of very much dictating this. And so I often like to remind my team, even like, hey, if you are not spending a ton of time on your computer browser on a weekend, you're not the only one, right? Like everyone's
Right.
just on their phone scrolling in bed, and like, what type of content do you want to scroll in bed? It's not a 10,000 word article. So I really try to remind people that like we live and breathe this world, and you can think it's very personal. So to go back to your question, I think, what could be considered the height of food criticism, and every paper has got a well-paid, well-fed critic, and
Right, right.
was very much at a time when the media industry was the distribution was so controlled. You print a magazine, you print a newspaper, it comes out regularly, you know exactly what to expect. That review probably isn't making it online or anything at the point. It's just very much, okay, once a week or once a month, this thing is going to come out, and you
Right.
could very much expect it. It was a routine, and there was a lot of power in being like that often singular voice, right? And so I think there was a time when it was all eyes on food critics, because if you didn't have that title and that institutional backing, who the hell was listening to you? You didn't have a
Right.
way to tell people your opinions. Like, it wasn't this is before Yelp, but it just like Yelp wasn't, even if Yelp had existed, like people just wouldn't have paid much attention to Joe Schmo
Right.
on the street. And then, of course, you had the internet begin to become so much more commonplace. And like, I think the first thing that really kind of started to democratize dining was, these food forums like Chow Hound, and even like Reddit, and all
wow.
of those
Yeah.
people who just ate a lot. They wanted to go where the food critics were sending them, but they also just had a lot of opinions about where they were eating. And so suddenly you could not just go to the professionals, right, who had a very rigorous, like, I dine 3 times, I'm anonymous, I don't tell
Right.
anyone who I am, I pay for my own checks. And then that expanded into the like, I'm not professional, but I have a lot of opinions. And if I've done, you can tell like the well-researched opinions on the internet still,
Yes.
right? So then you start to get some like credence there and some differing opinions there. And then, of course, with digital media professionals, you just had a lot more of people have that platform to say things and have a real influence and power. And so that extended to bloggers, which then extended to, social media creators who have their own platform and can say things. And whether you know or trust their accolades is a bit of a different story. But
Right.
I think now, today, fast forward a lot, and I'm obviously greatly simplifying this, everybody's got an opinion, and restaurants aren't perfect. People have on days and off days.
Yes, we
Restaurants
do.
have on days and off days.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of comes back to, it's the consumer's responsibility to take things with a grain of salt and understand, like, hey, just because somebody put something online doesn't mean that this is the only way it's ever going to be from
Right.
here on out. And so what we've essentially seen, I think the biggest shift in food media is this massive, massive democratization, which I think is great. Like, you don't just want all your information about food coming from one critic or one Michelin guide or one person who's kind of like come in and doesn't know the city but has dined at a few places and then is, sharing their opinions. You want that variety of opinions, but you also want the educated news consumer to be able to know the difference between a Yelp review, a blog post, a well-researched story. And I think that's kind of what I think is starting to happen, is that like the plethora of opinions and the way that media exploded, we have not kind of like caught up quickly enough from the media literacy point of view to really understand, okay, who is this person? Why, and do I trust them, and why?
And do you think this has hurt the food media?
Um,
Having so many voices,
no.
does it dilute?
No, I don't think
Okay.
hurt or dilute is right, but I
Does
do
it
think
it change? I mean,
has
obviously it's
certainly
changed.
made food media realize like, hey, if you don't control all the distribution, then you need to understand where everything else is coming from and how should you be in that space, right? So you won't find a brand today that's not on Instagram because we're all spending so much time on Instagram
Right.
or TikTok, wherever. But you don't want everybody on TikTok or Instagram to be doing the same thing. And so I think that's the challenge for media brands is what's my Instagram voice? What's my TikTok voice? It can't just be what you publish online, copy and paste and throw that on there because again, a savvy consumer is going to say like, this is so boring. This is not made for this platform. And so it's just really challenged publishers to think beyond, I write words, I hit publish, and it's out in the world. It's challenged them to be more visual. It's challenged them to think about video and motion and engaging and interacting. And that's true not just of media as a whole, but let's just take restaurant reviews, right? Nobody wants to read a restaurant review without photos. And if you're
That's
not
right.
taking photos these days, then like you're missing half, if not, all like 90% of the picture. And now it's okay. People want to see the video. They want to feel the energy of the room. They want to
Right.
like overhear a glimpse of a conversation and they want that little snippet. And so as journalism evolves into just like capturing more of this, reality, like the journalists also themselves have to think beyond just what's being written and also how am I showing off every other thing that I'm experiencing and feeling to show the reader that like I was here, I did my research, I know what I'm talking about.
Right. It's really fascinating. I mean, the speed technology, we think about somebody the other day said to me, that the iPhone just came out in 2008. And I was like, what? And, it seems like 5 minutes ago, but it also seems like forever, like
Yes.
technology it's like the rapid fire and certainly more so in your industry. I was having dinner with a friend last night about the difference between evolution and a trend.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm 55, so at my stage when I'm thinking about opening a restaurant, I'm still like it's Italian, it's French, and I'm not saying it's traditional French, but so many of the young chefs, they're just cooking whatever they want to cook.
Yes.
They open their restaurants, there's a line out the door, and
Yep.
I mean this from a place of respect. I'm like, wow, that would have never occurred to me to do that. So I definitely see the generational shifting that's happened. But your world, it seems like it's moving it just everything changes. So,
Yes.
good for y'all for keeping up.
It is. It's like what's changed in the past 10 years is light years from the 10 years before that, which was light years from the 10 years before that. And,
Right.
And, we're all in this ecosystem and we have phones and we do so much on them. And you really do have to think about like where attention is being spent and where people are getting their information and entertainment.
Yeah, because I know, like, for me, there's certain things that I'm comfortable, like, I'm just at my age, I'm not gonna do that. Or there are neighborhoods, we're in multiple states that I'll go, I'm too old to open a restaurant in that neighborhood. I'm not cool enough for that. And I'm okay with, I'm sort of okay with, I'm becoming more okay. But you guys in the media really have to stay at the forefront of where it's going. Maybe, I want to stay relevant.
Yeah.
But I also have to do things that are true to who Steve is.
Yes.
You have to kind of like, where's media going?
Yes. And I think the relevance point is a really good one because we also think about our audience the way a restaurant might think about, your diners, right? You want to be aware of what's new. You want to cover what's new. You want to be in the new places, but you also don't want to turn your back on whoever, has also been reading your website for 20 years or has been interacting with you in a certain way, or your regulars essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
So we have to think all the time about this balance of you don't want to turn your back on the people who've loved and supported you for so long, but you also don't want to think that those people can get you through however many next
That's
media
right. That's
evolutions
right.
are out there. And so how do you experiment and innovate and test things and not make people think like, oh, this is no longer a brand that I care about or
Right.
feel is relevant to me, while still making sure younger audiences, younger diners are like, oh, hey, that's cool. Like,
Right.
is that something I want to go and spend time with or dine there? And it's a really tricky balance. And I think part of the success for any brand that's doing that is that you can't, it's really hard when it's navigated or it's rooted in one person. And it's easier when it's kind of like this is
Yes.
rooted in a community. Communities change a little bit more quickly than people change. And so like your community and your culture, that's kind of the North Star as opposed to one person and the face of a brand, which I
Right.
think is like something that's so hard when you think about celebrity chefs and, celebrities in
I'm
general,
so
right?
glad. Yeah, I mean, the Indigo Road is very much not about Steve Palmer, and I love that because I'm lucky that collaboration. Like I like a lot of people in the room.
Yeah.
I need validation, but I don't need to be the guy. I don't want to be the guy. I mean, I would much rather either be talking about one of our chefs or our wine director or the fact that 60% of our senior team are women or, that's much more interesting. But yeah, if you're the sole arbiter of
Yeah.
what is your brand, that's a scary, it's interesting. You said it earlier that media, all of this is a reflection of what's going on in our world. And I remember 08, 09 when the recession hit, all the tablecloths came off the tables. That's when the Edison bulbs
Yep.
had their moment, reclaimed wood.
Yep.
Shake Shack was about 2 or 3 years old, and everybody started to burgers, tacos. And it became about the chef and the farm. Food reviews became less about service and hospitality, which was a little sad for the hospitality guy, but it really just became about the chef.
Yeah.
And that's a big burden to bear if you're that person.
Yes. But I think you talked about trend versus evolution. And I think one of the things we have kind of been thinking about as we look at the past 20 years of eater coverage is like that pendulum swings, right? Like
It does.
Again, the pandemic hit and we were pretty much only talking about personal stories, right?
Right.
Like nobody was rating the quality of food if it came in a takeout box, right? And it was all about, and then we were all like swarming back to restaurants. And so like everybody was like, I'm here for the hospitality. I'm here to interact with another human. I'm here to have a waiter like look at me and tell me the
Right.
specials. Like, please, like no more QR code menus,
Right.
Like, this like huge shift back into like, all things hospitality. And I think we're probably in a moment where we're going to shift back into like, okay, like we need the comfort foods. Everyone is so wallet conscious. Like we're going back to burgers. We're going back to tacos. And please, let's not make them so fancy. Like let's just have a great meal that's less frills because, the dollar it needs to stretch a little further now. And so like it's been interesting to watch it go back and forth. And I am hopeful that it's not kind of in this case of like, oh, it's chef only or it's farm only. Like that's not like a forever thing. And as the media changes the way people present themselves and the way they tell their stories, whether it's on a TV show or in a cookbook or in podcasts, like that's going to shift as well too.
Yeah, given the recent economic news, we may be in for a pretty big paradigm again,
Yes.
which is fine.
Yes.
We have a restaurant that's 20 years old and we have a restaurant that's 6 months old. And it's interesting to watch those arcs as they come and go. And that's why for me, it's, I see so many, I feel like one of the trends right now is, these super small 30, 40, 50 seat, precious, very personal restaurants, which I love, by the way. But we are also seeing restaurants close, I would argue, at a higher rate than COVID because of the economic stuff. I mean, you see, I follow all the eaters in the, Los Angeles. I mean, wage, rent. I mean, all of the macroeconomic issues that we're all struggling with.
Yeah.
So I think that's when I talk about trend versus evolution, like it's really, really hard back to that art and commerce.
Yes.
because I have some of the chefs I know that have it's 40 seats and they're not making any money,
Yeah.
and they're like, this is great, I created a job for myself, but it's 5 years later and I'm not making any money, and it's hard. So it's a very complex ecosystem that we are in.
And, I think the last time back in '08, we were in this situation and suddenly it was food trucks everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
Like everyone was like, oh, I don't need that overhead. Like, I'm just going to I just need a space to serve out of, right?
Right.
And I think in the pandemic, that became a focus on pop-ups. Like, let me just show up in someone else's kitchen and show off my personality and my cooking and see if
Right.
I can build an audience that way. And then suddenly it became like, okay, everyone's a specialty shop and all I do is donuts. But I'm going to make you the best damn donuts,
Right.
right? Like, keep it a really focused, like tight menu. And so you know exactly what you're making, and you're just specialized and you're known for this thing. And so I think the industry is creative. It's resilient. I wouldn't want to like pretend I know what's coming next. That's
Me
going to
neither.
be, interesting and worth following. But I do know that, as I look at eater coverage, like we spend so much time covering pop-ups now because we think that is where the next generation of chefs is coming from. And they might not have the money to just go ahead and open up a space even for like 10 seats, but for now, like they want to get their story told in another way. And eventually, hopefully they attract the investors to help them think bigger.
Right.
But, I
And
think-
they will.
yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of Eater is that you can read about the chef who's just coming up and wanting to do their own thing, and you can read about the Jean Georges and the Daniel Boulous of the world,
Right.
and the Steve Palmers who've got
Wow.
empires. And
Thank
you.
you.
Really
I don't know that
see
I'm on those guys' level, but
that whole spectrum.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I was talking with Vivian Howard. What I love about our industry is there's a place for all of it,
Yes.
right? And I'm very much have always been this way. I want everybody to win.
Yeah.
I don't think your success has anything to do with my failure. And like, we have an Italian restaurant in Charleston that's 11, 12 years old. 20 Italian restaurants have opened since then, and we're busier than we've ever been.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and there's space for all of it, right?
Yes.
There's space for Jean Georges, who has restaurants on 5 continents.
Yeah, and many cruise ships.
Yeah, and there's spaces for the pop-ups.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you were saying in terms of like the explosion and the way that food media has changed, the huge net positive, I think, is you've got way more educated diners out in
Yes.
the world now, too.
Oh my God, yes.
Compared to 20 years ago, and people know how to read menus and they understand why there's a caviar markup and that why
Right.
farms matter. And I think that has been, I believe, a net positive for the industry, is that people just understand more of what's going on when they sit down at a restaurant.
I'm always fascinated. My world is pretty insular. Most of the people I know are in the restaurant business. But when I'm talking to people outside of
Yeah.
the restaurant business, you really are, you hit the nail on the head. Like, there's just so much more educated now. And food it's the reason that they travel. Listen, somebody asked me, well, when you travel, is it mostly for food? I'm like, well, is there another reason to travel? I mean, like, I went to Japan because and I have a deep love for their culture because I like Japanese food in the States. And I went, okay, I need to go. There's so much more educated,
Yeah.
and it's great. It raises the bar. I mean, right? There's the expectation, I think, is more. And I think as the dollars get tighter, it becomes, okay, if I'm going to go out less, I want to go where I know I'm going to have a great meal, which is often when someone looks at the 38 essential restaurants at Eaters. See what I did there? Tell me about how y'all curate those, because I'm always, we all want to be on your list.
Yeah.
I mean, we do. Even the cool kids that are, like we're the hot new restaurant, how do you guys, I'm always like, how do they do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's no easy feat, but I think it comes from editors who breathe that city's dining scene day in and day out. And I think we're very careful never for it to be, the 38 fanciest restaurants,
Right,
or
right.
the 38 most expensive, or the 38 newest even. Like, I really think what makes it key is that it's a mix of newer places. We do have a kind of soft rule of ideally we're not featuring places until they're like at least 6 months old, because before that you're on our heat map of like hottest, newest.
Right.
That list has to do so much work. It's got to encapsulate the diversity of a city, because it's never going to be 38 Japanese restaurants or 38 French restaurants.
Right.
It's got to encapsulate a variety of budgets, because people don't just want the 5-star all the time. It's got to have a variety of neighborhoods, because even if most people, for instance, are spending their time on the Vegas Strip, you cannot talk about Vegas as a whole without talking about off-strip.
Right.
And so it has to do a lot of heavy lifting. And so for that reason, it's both very hard to update, but also very easy to be like, of course there's 38 restaurants that I want to shout out and recommend to everyone. And so our editors are kind of doing that thinking all the time in their day in and day out reporting. And sometimes we'll put a restaurant back on the list that has fallen off, and they've been open for 5 years, but they've done something different with their menu, and we think it deserves another shout out. And I think that's been what's been most gratifying, is when a restaurant has been around for some time and we're still able to bring it back into the spotlight.
I love that.
That's really rare, because as consumers, we're so focused on what's new, what's different. And so to remind people like, hey, this place has been around for 15 years, still really great.
Right.
I think that's something that Eater can really do well.
I love that. And thank you. Again, I mentioned we have 20-year-old, right? Our culture, we're so the new, the next.
Yes.
And Gramercy Tavern in New York is I've been quoted 100 times, my favorite restaurant in America. I've probably eaten there 60 times. I stalked Mike Anthony, who I think is the nicest chef in the industry, until he started to be my friend. I fanboyed him so hard that he finally was like, all right, here's my number. But it's 30 years old.
Yep.
And it feels relevant and fresh. It's as busy as it's ever been. So I thank you for that, because I love, as again, the old guy, sometimes I think falling in love with people that are still just doing it. Consistency isn't very sexy, right? I talk to our cooks, we have to fall in love with just doing the roast chicken the same way every day. And that's not with social media. And I look at my daughter now, the hit songs are 2 minutes instead of 4 minutes. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed that.
We're driving to school in the morning and I'm like, 2 minutes. She's like, well, I don't want to hear it longer than that. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, thank you for the list, because we all love that. Media as a whole, objective journalism versus subjective.
Okay.
There are times that Eater seems to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Fine dining, it seemed like a couple years ago, was taking a lot of hits.
Mm-hmm.
I won't mention names or restaurants, but there felt like there was this real. Would you say that you guys are subjective?
I think that.
And I'm not even thinking about this for Eater specific. It's just because I'm talking to you. I would ask Hunter Lewis the same thing.
No, I think that a brand like Eater, and we are, we're a media publication, but we're not necessarily like a news organization the way you might think of like CNN or whatever.
Right.
But I do think with what Eater does, of course, so much of it is subjective, because when you're tasting food, everything is subjective.
Everything.
And you really you've got to, it can only be someone's opinion, right? Otherwise, all of what you'd just be saying is there's XYZ things on a menu and it costs XYZ and it's in, this neighborhood and these are the hours. And you don't need a media publication to do that. I can get that from the restaurant's website. And so much of what Eater has always done is been driven by, experts who dine often. I don't want to even say dine well. They know a lot about what's going on, are going to tell you what's new, what's interesting, and provide the context and the why. And I do think so much of that is subjective. But of course, I also think so much of our news reporting and more of the in-depth reports are objective, and they have a point of view and they have a frame of mind. But I think generally you have your stories that are very fact-driven, because again, it's that type of story. And then you have your stories that are more lifestyle or point of view, and they're much more subjective. And I think you have to have that balance when you're talking about something like food.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. What does the word hospitality mean to you?
It means, I think, opening up your door and sharing a bit of who you are. So it's not, it might be your culture, it might be your personality. I think there's a level of vulnerability needed. And it really is, at the end of the day, like you want people to feel welcome and at home and comfortable. And so how you do that can differ, but I don't think you can do it without kind of sharing a little bit of yourself.
I like that. I ask that question of every single guest.
Again, I haven't worked in restaurants, so
That's
it's,
but
it's
that's
a
okay.
different
But
point of
you
view.
have a point of view on hospitality. What's your hope for the hospitality industry as you look out into the next 5 years?
Yeah, I just hope that the industry kind of continues this the ability to look out for each other. So whether that
Mm,
means information sharing in terms like, hey, here's what it takes to open up a restaurant, or whether it means, like we're saying, being transparent and opening up the books, as so many are doing now with, news of the tariffs, and people are literally saying like, this is how much something used to cost, this is how much it's going to cost now.
yeah,
Like that type of information is something that you just couldn't provide previously. And so I hope that this kind of like taking care of each other, not just from a like taking care of your diners and
right.
hospitality point of view, but the industry really looking out and saying like, hey, it's hard. And so however we can pull up the next person, like let's do that. I think that's what I really hope continues.
I love that. I love that. What are you most afraid of?
I am afraid that with gosh, I hope this won't happen, but I do fear that with prices going up and this kind of economic awareness, people may choose to dine out less often. And I think a big pattern of that would really obviously hurt the restaurant industry at large. And so I am afraid that there will be like a quick pivot to, oh, like we're gonna hunker down and everything's gonna be at home. And I my hope is that when making these kind of like, purchasing decisions, people are still aware of, you have to spend money on the places you want to patronize and survive. Otherwise, like it's just not how the economy works. Like
No,
if you're not going to the places that
no.
you want to see last for another 5 years, 20 years.
And we're already, I don't know an operator that will tell you that they made more money in 24 than 23. So we're already in
Yes.
a, not a dramatic slide, but it's harder. It's harder than it's ever been.
Hmm.
And I've been doing this a long time. So I'm glad. Thank you for that. Um, what's the thing you're most proud of?
I think that I am I'm proud to, I think, professionally speaking, I'm proud to be at a brand that means a lot to a lot of people. I think when if you're out in the wild and you see like an eater sticker or a sign, like you understand the kind of authority and trust that comes with the brand. And so I think it's really rare to have for any 20-year-old brand to still be resonating and to be relevant and important. And so I'm proud that Eater has that, and obviously it's my hope to continue to build on that for as long as I can.
How about Mochi?
Mochi, I am most proud that I was able to kind of build a thing and then have the foresight of when to step away. And so it was, from its founding, it was meant to be for young Asian American women. And I definitely hit a point where I was like, I can't speak to the 18-year-olds like as much as I used to, and
Right.
let that be someone else, and let me like the best thing I can do is to let somebody else step in as editor in chief. And so we're able to do that. I think we're on our third editor in chief now. And so I'm extremely proud to have built something and then known when to walk away. Not walk away. I'm still involved, but I'm not in the
No,
day to day anymore.
that's powerful.
Yeah.
I often say, I never got fired because I always knew when it was time to walk away. Great. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much
Thank you,
for being on
Steve.
Say Grace. The last thing, so the word grace for me,
Hmm.
when I wrote my book, Say Grace, some people said it sounds a little religious. And I'm not. I said, well, in the South and Sunday supper, when we sit down, we say grace.
Hmm.
We say what we're thankful for.
Yes.
So, what are you thankful for?
Huh. It's funny when you say the word grace, what actually comes to mind for me is again something that feels like a shift from the pandemic, is have grace for yourself and to take care of yourself and really not just kind of, many people when they're younger, it's kind of push, push, push. And I think about myself last and I'm going for the big job or I'm going for, whatever it might be, bigger goals. And I think when I think about grace, I think about taking a few minutes to make sure that you yourself are taken care of as well. And so that's, I think, what I'm thankful for is that I have the ability to step back and not just think about the bigger picture, but also think about, okay, like, what's my role in all of this? I have a lot of, power or influence, or however you want to think about it. I'm going to use it in the most responsible way I can. But I'm thankful that I have that ability, but also thankful that I can pull back and say, like, wait, let me just make sure I'm doing the right thing for myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for joining us on Say Grace. If you like what you heard, tell a friend, share it on social. Thanks and have a great day. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Say Grace, Food for Thought and Hospitality. We hope you join us next time as we continue to dive deeper into the inspirational stories about the transformative power of hospitality.